The risk of the month for March 2022 is Limitation Exceedances. We want those voluntary safety reports of all kinds to keep coming in. But you know what? Back in the old days, that wasn't always the case. I guess back then, they thought if they didn't hear about bad things, well, no bad things were happening. So if someone did report a safety concern, well, obviously, he or she was the problem. So if we get rid of them, problem solved, right? Wrong. You didn't really solve any problems at all. And in fact, it made things a lot worse because no one wanted to tell anyone anything about any risky things that they were seeing. These days, we want to get those safety reports, especially the voluntary ones, because you're our eyes and ears out there in the aviation world. The voluntary reports are the best reports because they help us to implement solutions that actually work. Here are just a few examples of aircraft limitations exceedances. There are a lot more possibilities than just these examples, by the way. What causes limitation exceedances? Well, lots of things can. For example, the wind. We know it can get very windy in March and April, so it's good to plan for it, or you may get some wind shear that pushes you over the maximum airspeed with your flaps down. Here's a case where a crew on final approach into Prescott Airport encountered some wind shear, resulting in a flap overspeed. Here's a case of a flap overspeed where the student encountered winds that were quite different than what was forecast. And here's a case where a crew experienced a flap overspeed and there was an air met out for low-level turbulence, which they encountered. Sometimes a limitation exceedance is the risk inherent with the training scenario you've planned, such as emergency descents and recoveries from unusual attitudes. In this case, the crew is practicing recovering from nose-down unusual attitudes, and they were right on the line between the red and yellow arcs on the airspeed indicator. And in this case, a crew in a Seminole was practicing an emergency descent because of a simulated fire. Then the student lowered the landing gear, then let the airspeed creep up a little bit too far with the gear extended. Sometimes it's just due to poor crew resource management. In this case, the crew had a propeller overspeed when the instructor, waiting to see if the student would recognize and correct an error, waited a bit too long to step in and came too close to the RPM red line. And sometimes it's due to ordinary time pressures, also known as get-there-itis. In this case, the crew oversped the prop simply because they were flying at a faster speed than they usually would because they were running late due to an earlier maintenance delay. If you remember the Swiss cheese model of barriers that sometimes let risks slip through, then you can think of a good voluntary safety report as one where, well, you notice that somebody moved your cheese. So if you notice that somebody's trying to steal a slice of your cheese, you know exactly what to do. That's right. Give us a voluntary safety report. Thank you in advance for all the cheese-stealing voluntary safety reports we're anticipating getting this month.